Good morning. So, per usual, I'm coming on a little early just to correct for the glitch that I think happens here. So, I'm just going to hang for probably about 30 seconds because it is already 8 o'clock and I'm going to get into it. So, all right, I think we are good to go. So, good morning, the beautiful, beautiful people of the Parinomiverse. This is the Parinoma practice space, and the purpose of us spending time together here is that we are developing the devotional practice of a consistent practice of uniting cognition, mental, emotional, and reflex, so the body as well. And when we bring those things together, the type of transformation that is possible is magnificent, next level. So I'm Katie Bickford, and I am the author of Parinama Method. I am co-creator of it, and also founder of Parinama Method as kind of, check out theparinamamethod.com if you want to learn a little bit more as far as some context stuff about what it is and even what it contains in terms of a methodology. It is helpful to go there because today we are going to talk about an isolated aspect of the Parinama method, which is the final installation for Interruptions and Stressors week. And we're going to talk about boundaries. Now, a reminder to kind of pan out the Interruptions and Stressors week, we were talking about the context, or actually I'll give some context here, is that just a reminder that what we're talking about are the things, I'm just going to call them things now, that impact the development of our nervous system. So just as a quick little dippity-doo into the kind of the framework here, I can just get it to go here, is just a reminder that our day-to-day lived experience, like how it feels to be you, is 95% reflex. Our brain is only operating from like straight up cognition, the kind of thinking that we tend to believe we're doing all the time. We're only doing 5% of the time. And it's incredibly energetically demanding. So it is a high form of intelligence that we conserve our energy and we work off of reflexes. But the thing is, we're looking at like, okay, the way I feel and the way I operate in the world is highly reflexive. Where were those reflexes formed? And here at Parinoma Method, in this methodology rather, is we're looking at how our early events and circumstances formed our reflexes. So we reacted to our early environment and we responded with whatever faculties and materials we had available to us, which are our own capabilities and the amount of energy and whatever the cobbled together with the materials available. And then as we mature and our nervous system begins to develop increased cognitive faculties, we develop belief systems about those reflexes, about their necessity as a fixed notion. And that forms what we consider to be reality. And that reality that we're operating in, which is this 95% patterned reality of reflex, is projected out into the world. So we're either projecting our belief system, which is, things being hard is necessary, is one that I was reading this morning out of the book. But just our beliefs about even how hyper vigilant we need to be. It's like, you've always got to be on your toes or someone's going to come sniping for you, or, or even beliefs about how how much, like, emotion can be expressed. And so what will happen in general is we'll either be projecting our own patterning out into the world, and the world will like validate and reflect it back to us. But another layer of this is that we tend to seek in familiar environments where our patterning sinks in and makes sense. So this rationalization, so this every time we kind of do this patterning, we tighten the tangle, we tighten the notion that our reflexes and our beliefs are fixed. Like, this is reality, this is the world. And so ideas that the world's really painful, that the world, like, to be alive in the world is really sad, is something that is a example of this, where it's like these are fixed things that absolutely cannot be changed. And I'm gonna a little bit tangent this, because in a path towards greater consciousness, I want you to think of like the window, what's outside, and the watcher. So think of looking through a window out into the world. And the first layer of consciousness and trying to adapt our consciousness has to do with changing what we're looking at outside the window. So the idea that if the environment around us changed, that we would, so it's like, look, if it wasn't snowing and it was sunny, and it's not entirely untrue. So it's like you're looking out the window and you're like, oh, if it wasn't a cloudy day, I would be, just everything would be better. Or if it wasn't snowing, or if it wasn't whatever, like it's like if things were to change outside, everything inside would change. So the thing is, it's not untrue. So if it's sunny, I yesterday was sunny and I felt great. I was like, this is the best day ever. There is something to that. But the idea, that you start to realize that if you change what's outside, if it stays that way long enough, you're like, oh, if it would just be sunny. And then it's sunny all the time. And you're kind of like, yeah, no, some of the stuff, it's like, yeah, that didn't exactly solve it. And this goes for making money, perfect body stuff, perfect partner stuff, is like the outside part when it's like, yeah, I got that. And it does. It's not that it does not, but there's still this issue of kind of like the window. So now the thing is like, well, if we clean up the lens a little bit, if I clean, my perspective. So it's not just what's out there, it's like, how do I see it? Am I grateful? Am I cultivating gratitude? So you're cleaning the window off, and you're putting a lot of attention into the layer of how you're perceiving things and your mindset. And this is one where, really common to see people stepping into this. And so it's like, let's clean this window so everything's brighter. Clean the dirt off the window so everything's brighter. And that also will change your lived experience. But there's something that I'm going to point to with Parinama, and I'm not going to go too much deeper into this, but it is when we change our relationship with what we're looking at. So the watcher. So when the watcher changes their patterns, and they're like, and is able to shift their comfort and their relationship with problems and with things being disappointing and with the dirty windows, and when there's an equanimity that's instilled within us, even to a certain extent, deciding like, I'm actually going to cast my gaze elsewhere right now, because looking out this window, but the thing is that when we change and we shift from within, there's something that happens that is to describe this is to explain that now the anchoring point is not on what is outside being able to inform how we feel inside, and even our perspective on how we're seeing what is outside is not the anchor that shapes what we feel inside. What happens inside is that now, when we're deep in our parinama practice, and we are like a lighthouse where our experience is emanating from within us out into the world, we're actually able to look at terrible things. We don't look away from them. So the idea that's like, well, if outside is okay, then I can be okay inside. When we have done this processing, I'm just going to call it processing, and we have found the internal source of our life, our internal power, our internal emotion capacity and feeling and preference. We've found a sense of trust and safety in our reflexes. We've found our inherent lovability, our inherent worth. There's no validation required. And when this is emanating from the inside out, now we do not have to turn away from people who need us to be able to see them. And this has to do with justice in the world. I read a post recently where somebody's like, well, I don't do news anymore. Right. And so to me, that's definitely, you're still in the what's outside the window or what's polishing the window. But when we're in here, the world outside us becomes manageable in a way that I will absolutely point to saying that we do not understand even to want this, because it was, for me, I'll say it was so beyond my capability of even comprehending what I wanted, because I was so patterned into wanting the same things, of wanting wealth and wanting, physicality stuff, and, and things that I knew to want. And, and those things, it's not that they go away, but they're kind of contextualized in sort of a greater phenomenon. But so why am I bringing this up? Why am I bringing this up? Because when we're talking about parinamaing and contextualizing this, and we're talking about what is this patterning that we're loosening, what are these adaptations that we're loosening, is that we're seeing them as malleable, and we're actually softening and disintegrating them to a certain extent so we can reveal the integrity and authenticity within us that is a unique fingerprint of who and what you are, that has a unique reason for existing. And this is something that becomes more and more clear with this practice. And what becomes even more and more clear as far as a humanizing aspect is that to realize this is the case for every single person on this planet, and the actualization of that is uniquely theirs, and it is not necessarily subscribing to every single person wants to drive a Lamborghini and that's kind of stuff. It's like the thing that is your fulfillment is really uniquely yours, and is really uniquely satisfying, and is fulfilling, and creates a type of charisma that is extraordinary. And it creates a charisma that allows you to connect with people in a way that you crave. And at another point, we're going to talk about what falls away and why that is hard. But let's get into boundaries. So for the last installation of Interruptions and Stressors, I'm not going to talk today about hubs necessarily. Actually, I am going to talk about hubs because we're going to read. We are going to read together, and And so the interruptions and stressors, there's a couple things I want to just read. And I realize that reading out of a book, which is ironic because there's about 300 videos on this channel, live videos that are archived that you can watch that are coded by page number. With me just reading like freestyle with absolutely no structure. But if you're reading the book, maybe it's helpful for having a companion to come along the ride for you. Okay, so this is page 21. And so we won't remember the stressors from our early years, especially those from the development of the first three hubs before episodic memory is neurologically possible. And we don't need to. This is really important here. But reflection and excavation can help connect rational cognition to make sense of deeper subconscious reflexes. That is, unless remembering causes distress or even re traumatization. A relatively simple way to test for interruption in a hub is whether you resist or believe that a human right or boundary is a birthright, or whether you believe it's a birthright or a privilege to be earned. Interruption separates us from our humanity, having us believe we need to earn dignity. So, another point I'm going to make here is that this is the current psychological model as it relates to the notion of trauma, which this is, kind of a proxy of, is a real hyperfixation in this early patterning. So what we'll find, and what I find, is that people are just, it's now become absolutely immersed into the zeitgeist of our culture, which is to talk about, this is what my parent is, this is who I am because my parent is this, and that this becomes its own fixed pattern. So this is like a pattern of, a patterning on a patterning, which is this rationalization on steroids. So it's like the reflex, and then it's like, well, here's the rationalization. But the thing that doesn't happen is the transmutation of the understanding the adaptation that occurred in us, how we adapted to that outside of our natural occurring, what we are, and how to shift that by using techniques and exercises that have to do with somatic practice. So we're going deeper than just like, hey, I understand why I'm like this. And then, and that becomes its own new tangle. This is where we're going into the feeling of it and the reflex of it with the techniques and exercises. And so something I will say for me, when I am talking with people, is that I do not have their very, I have some, but it's actually sort of right-sized uh, identity around my childhood, and I had a pretty interrupted and stressed childhood. And and as a sort of I guess we'll call it party practitioner, I will say that I do not, now that it is resolved in this very particular way, I do not spend, it's not actually even part of the way I look at the world, which is like recalling my parents as being the architects of who I am. It's understanding that they created the initial patterning, which creates an outsized notion of what it is. But once we realize, like, okay, they were the first, and now I'm the last with the patterning, that it just changes everything. And these narratives wind up being able to be softened and disintegrated. So, so one thing, if you want to read more into the philosophy of this, because I want to get into reading some of the boundaries, is the biggest point I want to make is that if going into the specifics, and we go into the specifics, not exhaustively, but pretty in depth in the individual hub chapters for each of the facets of our consciousness or lived experience, um, it's not actually necessary, but it's helpful. And if it's like, look, I don't want to go there and it's going to re-traumatize us, these are helpful they do kind of surface stuff, granted. So it's like this stuff kind of like does have to be, in some cases sort of released, but sometimes it doesn't need to be released with the storyline. That more on that later. But looking at a good way to just sort of index trauma, but I'll call them interruptions and stressors here, is to look at your human rights and your belief around whether they're deserved or earned, whether they're just inherently yours and taken away, or you need to be earning them, for both human rights and boundaries. So, and one of the things that I write about here is the point of exploring interruptions and stressors is not to find people to blame. Nobody wants to be incapable, and folks don't tend to consciously understand why they cause harm. So expecting people to take responsibility for hurting us is often above and beyond their capability and capacity, and holding them accountable, it's often challenging. It's in an ongoing process. So there's some work in there, but there are many ways people cope with the pain of hurting you, such as through denial that it happened, diminishing it, wasn't that big a deal, or dissociating, which is just sort of browning out on it. And so psychologist Alice Miller wrote in The Drama of the Gifted Child, someone who was not allowed to be aware of what was done to them has no way of telling about it except to repeat it. So again, someone who was not allowed to be aware of what was done to them has no way of telling about it except to repeat it. And so this is where we see these perplexing behavior patterns of people who received really terrible treatment and terrible circumstances, and then they wind up doing it to the people that come after them. So this is also why this excavation is revolutionary, because it breaks the pattern of the sub and unconscious, or the whatever. Yeah, it breaks it. It breaks a hold of it. Okay. So there's more on this, but we do not have time. So I'm gonna, in the interest of rolling right along here, I am going to get into it. So once again, we did a little thing on boundaries. There's an earlier live in the archive here. So 24 and 25 and 26. If you have the book and you're following along and you want to go a bit deeper, because we're kind of grazing over the surface here to just really glean the big takeaways. But if you feel so called to go in a bit deeper, this is a good place to look. And once again, my whole kind of take on this, my hot take on this is that when reading these, you're looking for whether you go, yeah, I don't know. That's, you're looking to see if it like truly, because the interruption and the belief system, I'm repeating myself now, but it's just like, it really bears repeating, is that we come to believe that that our human rights and our boundaries are kind of not necessarily like are earned rather than truly ours. Okay, so let's get into it. So what I'm gonna do here for the next 7 minutes is I'm going to read. I'm going to name the boundary, and then I'm gonna read a little bit about it. So, and as time starts to run out, I'm gonna start to um, accelerate. And once again, this is not the first time I've read these in the Parinama practice space. So, okay, so the first hub, the boundary, is the physical boundary. So your body is yours. You alone decide who is allowed to touch you. You choose where this boundary starts. It can be your skin, or it can be a parameter surrounding you. The more subtle aspect of this is related to social touching, physical closeness, and any other situation related to body autonomy, such as medical procedures, massage, dentistry. The physical boundary also includes respect for what Nedra Schwab calls material boundaries your possessions, including respect for borrowing your things or your money. This one is, I will say, this is, you could really do sort of a, kind of a very long format, just kind of conversation about this. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going because there really is a lot that can be said on this. And all of it maps back to how much you feel you have the right to uphold this. Whether this is something, it's like, well, the reality though is that people, blah, like, hug you. The reality is that people, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes I do it. Sometimes I'll touch somebody. I'm like, fuck. Like I'll put my hand on their shoulder or something. And I'm like, motherfucker, I'm doing it. Okay. Invading. Because I can be invasive. So the second hub, emotional boundary. So your emotions and feelings are your own. You're too sensitive is an assessment from someone who doesn't have the emotional capacity to hold space for you. It's not an objective assessment of you. It's a reflection of that person. Part of a healthy boundary in this hub involves paying attention to how people make us feel and making decisions about who we want to spend time with. People who are emotionally safe. Boundary invasion in this hub can involve oversharing and mistaking inappropriate levels of personal disclosure as emotional closeness. Also, there are people, psychic vampires, who drain our energy and take advantage of the so-called politeness of an inability to uphold this boundary. It's best to create distance with them. Lots of it. Sex is a potent combination of both the physical and the emotional boundary. Consent is required to cross it. Without consent, an action becomes an invasion and possibly an assault. An indication of interruption in this hub is second guessing your gut feeling and not acting on it. Interruption in this hub separates you from trusting your feelings, which can cause denial or distrust of one's emotions. And then we've got personal power boundary. This is the third hub. And this has to do with respect for your time and your energy, both how we uphold people respecting ours and how we respect that of others. I am a huge invader in this hub. I will tell you, I will totally take people's time. And that's something I continuously work on. Or it's not even like work on. Actually, I want to like reframe that. It's something that is an inclination of mine. So back to, there is an aspect of you that it's like you're maybe hoping goes away when you like really clear stuff out. But there's stuff that's just kind of like who we are, and that becomes revealed the more we practice. And this is one where it's like, yeah, it's kind of my natural inclination to be very like kind of forceful. So I have to kind of, when I'm interacting with other people, I have to really bring consciousness into awareness around them, which is another layer of this. In Parinam, where we're going inward, but there's also a layer where we go outward, not covered in the book, but I'm going to give a shout out at the end of this towards where we can look to be figuring out how to get better at that. So the fourth hub is the relationship boundary, and this is the protected space of chosen social, familial, and intimate connections. This is basically like your home. It's a force field, and who comes to visit and who lives here. These are people, there are people who come in uninvited and are oblivious to their invasion. These are folks who let in, cause harm, cause distress in our lives. There are also those who are already in, such as family, who may look through the cabinets, judging and criticizing. In the boundary of your inner circle, you decide what type of access you're willing to offer, and so that you can know when it's been overstepped or disrespected. These invasions are painful, especially when people who cannot love us or do not respect themselves come into our inner circle and make us feel unsafe when where we're most vulnerable. And then we have sound and verbal boundary, negativity, hostility, loudness, things we don't want, that like really impact our nervous system. And just a reminder that we previously discussed boundaries as spending our nervous system capacity, our nervous system budget. So this is one that's commonly like overlooked as far as us consciously thinking what drains us, and limiting our exposure to it instead of thinking we just need to get tougher. Visual boundary, this is about seeing things, invasive eye contact, um, intense images. And then the seventh hub, intellectual and spiritual boundary. This is more, involves all of the previous six, affecting the questions we ask and what we believe. We won't have time to discuss it today, but it's page 26 if you feel so inclined to continue the exploration. So thank you. That is it for today, for this week, for Interruptions and Stressors week. Next week, we talk adaptations. So this is, we've kind of looked a little bit at the hubs. We're talking about what it means to have an interruption and stressor to its development. And next week, we're talking about well, how do we adapt and what are the functions of this? This is a really good one. There's a bunch of stuff that we get into, and I'm looking forward to doing it with you. And the final, I'm going to re-plug the Enneagram Blueprint. Look it up on Instagram. This is when we're talking about, okay, now we're building our relationship and the strength of what we have inside. The Enneagram Blueprint is, okay, now we know ourselves. How do we interact with those around us and their unique dispositions? How do we interact with that? Because, by the way, once you reveal yourself, you will find that you are uniquely you and people around you are uniquely them and need and want different things. And there are fantastic ways that we can use consciousness to be better at how we form relationships, interact, and are effective with other people. So that is it for now. Thank you so much for coming along. Big love to you, and see you next week. Also, if you are just dying for more, a reminder that under the lives in this YouTube channel, there's about 1 million videos of reading the book. And if you want more just in terms of context, the website, theparinamamethod.com, is a great place to start. Check it out. Bye for now.